Thank you all very much. This is a really distinguished panel here. This is going to be one of only 2 panels that we have during the course of the day, and the next act we'll get into sort of the TED Talk way of doing this. So we've just seen an awful lot from Dean about distribution and content distribution, and I want to bring the conversation around to what we do, and that is marketing and promotion. So let me start on this end and ask you, what is the biggest challenge for television marketers today?
Well, I mean, one thing I'd like to say is that TV is definitely not dead. And I mean, the talk previously was really interesting, and clearly people are watching TV in lots of different ways, but huge amounts of people still watch TV in a reasonably conventional way. I mean, the numbers say that, you know, Barb is pretty robust, so people are still watching live TV. And clearly that varies depending on the audience. And people at the younger end of the spectrum are clearly watching TV more in different ways, as in they're watching more VOD, they're watching more short form, they're watching more clips online, etc. People at the older end are clearly watching more TV conventionally, but TV in a linear fashion is definitely not dead. And it's hard to predict when it will be dead, and you know, people try and do that, but I think that's pretty impossible to do. And you can see that the biggest shows on the PSB channels still get huge audiences. So I think the biggest challenge is if you are trying to talk to very young audiences, how do you talk to them? But I mean, our most powerful promotional tool is still our own airtime. So still, the promos that we make, that we run in our own airtime across all our channels, is still by far the most powerful promotional tool. And if you put a value on it, it is worth more money than all the other media that we buy. But it's clearly a challenge for to talk to young audiences, and the growth of social media, etc., is clearly a big challenge for us.
So I think we used to say at
and
NBC,
an opportunity.
Opportunity is the most important thing, I think. But we also used to say that the promos got more eyeballs because they were placed in programs that had greater ratings or total ratings points than the shows themselves. Because you know, you put a promo into a big show, all of a sudden TRPs are huge. From a global perspective, Raf and Marco, tell me a little bit about what your specific kinds of challenges are, Raf.
I think it depends on what we're talking about. Obviously, you know, worldwide, we are sometimes just distributor, sometimes we're actually making the content, and sometimes actually we're working to promote BBC content, both globally and locally. And I think it depends what we're talking about. One of the key things we've been looking at, particularly as we work with SVOD partners, is the biggest problem we face is brand attribution. So what happens when your content leaves your hands and suddenly it's on a different platform? People don't know. It might go up as a Netflix original, that actually it's originated somewhere else. So that's what we've been looking at, is the challenge of how we connect to our audiences and ensure that we grow our brand. The other thing is, I think, the complexity of our briefs. You know, we are no longer talking to one target audience, but for one content brand, we might be talking to a split of 5 different audiences on different platforms. So the explosion of the assets that we have to deliver to make sure that we're talking to each of those audiences in as intimate a way and as compelling a way is a challenge we face. And at the end of the day, making sure that it all syncs up in a really integrated way. And I think that brings its own challenges, because I don't think departments are getting any bigger. It's about making more with very stretched resource.
Are you finding, Marco, let me ask you this, are you finding that you're having to create with a marketing and promotion department, an ROI for your own group? Do you have to now not look at just, okay, I need to promote and market this program, but I need to generate revenue, and I need to make sure that there is brand delineation between the people who are creating the programs, NBCUniversal International, and the brands that you're working with to help distribute the programs?
I think one of the things that Raf touched on is we are at a point where no one actually really knows where it's going to go. So from linear, we know linear is still very strong. I think one of the things that talking about brand affinity and brand recognition is key. When we were on our own channels, then everyone knows where you're at. As we start going out, we're playing on a much wider scale. Making sure that people recognize your brand, and I think that's a very important thing. We're talking more and more about brands and not channels. You're sort of starting to talk about, and brands, by that I also mean things like program brands. So you talk about sort of franchises that are also programming. So the brand becomes very important, and attributing that is key. And to do that internationally on a global level, especially when you've got brands that operate through different territories, becomes quite complex for any marketing and creative team. And the deliverables is huge. So you're now dealing with a much greater number of deliverables than you ever did before. You've got different formats that you're playing with. And it's outside of your own ecosystem, so it starts becoming not in your control, essentially, so where this is going to be. And I think from that perspective, from that side of it, it's hugely exciting, but also very complicated. And there isn't really a format. We came from a traditional world where you kind of knew what you were doing, those processes that were going to work, and now you're rediscovering those. And I think from that perspective, it's a very exciting time for any creative and marketing team that is out there. And you're talking about huge collaboration. So this whole concept, so a great idea is still a great idea, creative is still great creative. But it's now, how do you apply that through all the various media in a way that you still get brand, or you get brand attribution, you get recognition when it's very crowded out there fundamentally as well.
You, Mark, you were nodding in agreement there. Tell me a little bit about how this dovetails with what you do, and how sort of the distribution aspect and the marketing aspects work together.
One of the key challenges as a TV production company, as opposed to a broadcaster, is increasingly having to think through the lens of a marketeer when creating formats and TV shows. It's no longer good enough just to have a vision of a television show. You've got to think through the eyes of the person who's receiving it, whether that be the broadcaster, and then the distributor onwards, and then the consumer after that, and go, hang on a second, if we're going to make this TV program, how is it going to be marketed, perceived, branded, distributed, platform agnostic, etc., which goes right back up the value chain to the person that the first point of creation is to think like a marketeer rather than just a TV producer. We're seeing a shift in the way that we build our teams now from the traditional just TV development to TV development plus creative, plus digital, plus marketing. That's the creative dynamic that's required at the point of development.
Do you guys have the ability to deal with the TV production companies and the producers as closely as you would like in order to distribute your message, regardless of reach and frequency? It's about talking about how do you tell that story?
Absolutely. I think it's happening more so now. And I think that's the part that's really exciting, actually. Within our team, I suppose over the last 2 years, where we've undergone a radical change, we are at the table with executive producers, not just talking about what is the, I suppose to us, we look at it as end-to-end content marketing, which is about what is that program brand going to be like, what is going to be its core message in whatever series that is. Talking about actually when we go out to sell that at market, what does that look like, right through to what is that consumer-facing message. And it gets down to specifics such as having access to what, we were just working on Sherlock and understanding particular plot points to make sure that when we are creating those digital campaigns, when we know the conversation is going to kick up, we've got to kick off, and there's going to be a frenzy. We've got a piece of content that we know we are going to serve up that is just going to maximize what the conversation is around that. And I think that's a very different place to be in from where we were in the traditional days, where they would just make the show, package it up, and it got to you in your promo department, and you made a little campaign to tell people it was on. We are there at the coalface working with executive producers to make sure that we're able to seize every single opportunity to talk to our audiences.
Let's talk a little bit about the new normal, which is the digital distribution of marketing content. How do you guys play with that?
Well, I mean, just to back up what Raf was saying, we have very close relationships with producers. They value what we do in marketing, and we will have very early on conversations, obviously facilitated by commissioners, but we have direct conversations and big dramas, for example, very closely involved with the producers in terms of access to the storylines very early on. We'll get invited to read-throughs of scripts, and working very closely with the point you were making about particular aspects of the storyline, something that might, you're obviously dealing with sort of huge returning shows, huge brands, but brands that we're building, like Humans in its second series, for example, is a good one. But the digital, my job and my team's job is primarily focused on getting as many viewers to that show on Channel 4 or E4, and also when that show is on All 4. And for some people, it being on All 4 is the first time they see it. Maybe for some young viewers, for some people, it's still a kind of catch-up scenario. But that's my primary focus, obviously. And we need people to see advertising around those shows, because that's how we fund our kind of sort of unique model. But in terms of working with producers, they obviously want their show to be hugely successful and to get recommissioned and to be sold around the world. And we're looking at, we will do content that might be seen more in the realm, more the realm of content marketing. We did a sort of recent thing with Facebook around Human Series 2, where we created this bot which developed consciousness. So it's kind of getting across the plot line that these synths are developing consciousness.
So it felt like AI.
Yeah, and it was a really fun thing to do. We could put it out at a reasonable scale, so it acted as a piece of marketing. But if people were seeing that and they weren't watching the shows, that wouldn't be great marketing. And distribution per se, as being different from marketing, is an interesting area. And I don't know if that's what you're getting at. And we've got a short form strategy we're developing. The guy previously was talking about the power of short form. We are into short form now, and a new part of our business model will be, the whole world of kind of what you might call native advertising or ad-funded content, and we're going to be working with brands to do some of that in the short form area. And obviously, the viewing of that content in social is the end, so to speak, as opposed to a return path. But that's a slightly different thing.
Well, yeah, but actually that's interesting, because native advertising and the kind of advertising that's done based on your usage of some kind of content. So how Amazon sells you a product on your Facebook page because you've gone to it a number of times.
Yeah.
Is there a way that television marketing can take advantage of that kind of sort of programmatic designed advertising? And as a first question, and as a second question, do you have a short form strategy with the program producers that creates new content for you to send out as a marketing tool?
Yeah, obviously we're using with our media agency, we're looking at all the amazing new ways of actually reaching audiences. And I think, we've been making the point around everything is additive. To maximize the efficiency of your media, you're having to create new formats, and it's just, there's more work to be done by everyone in this room because of that. And we're looking at the obvious things, clearly retargeting and stuff like that. And I know for some people that's a bit of a dirty word. It's like, I looked at that thing briefly and now it's following me around with an ad. But you can be very clever, and you can retarget people who've already expressed an interest in a show, and we use our data strategy. So we want to be as clever as we can, but with data and our media buying. But but in terms of creating content that we will then put out through social media, it's a bit of a mixed economy. We might work with the producers of a long form show in terms of making that stuff. We might make it ourselves through For Creative, our brilliant in-house creative agency. We might work with another producer of it. But I always want to feel that if I'm investing money in that stuff, there's the kind of long-term payback, which could be to your overarching brand. There's a payback to the brand of the show, but ultimately, I want to know that if I'm investing money, that there is going to be, people are going to engage in it, and they're going to want to view the actual show on All 4 on linear.
So I wanted to just say that the Humans campaign for the first season was brilliant. And I really, I felt that, that if any of you in this room aren't familiar with what was done for that campaign, you should be, or you're missing out on all the different ways I think that a program can be marketed. I wanted to buy a human on eBay, for God's sakes. I mean, there was just so much cool stuff that was going on.
Well, I think the people responsible for it in the room, actually.
Well, congratulations to all of you. Really great job. Marco, you were just about to jump in there.
I think it's interesting because we're talking about programming, and I think we're trying to find a sort of almost like a format that we approach, and you will have incredible variety, and I think that's what's going to be a theme. So you do engage with some of the producers more than others. Others you get no engagement. On others you got acquired. On others you are actually involved in what is fundamentally a bought piece that you have direct access to. There's no one size fits all anymore. Not that it probably was, but even more so today that's the case. You also, in our case, you're dealing with multiple brands which have different programming, and sometimes the programming is actually across the same or different brands on that. You have genres. I think one of the things from our perspective is you're almost every time looking at every piece of work you do with a new, potentially new processes, new makes, new thoughts. You don't have that, I'm going to do a super teaser 30 second and we're done. That's no longer the case. You're much more engaged with everything seems to be a start again to a certain extent. If I'm launching a new show, in our case, it might just be UK. In other cases, it's across 6, 7 territories, multi-language. How I approach that is going to be completely different. And it's the same team. So the same teams are doing this. So what you're getting is an incredible sort of energy that comes from that. There isn't that kind of, just standardization of processes. There is a need to actually be innovative, not just in creative terms or in marketing terms, but in all of them. So in PR, marketing, creative, all working together to actually make something that is going to resonate, something that's going to be of interest. And frankly, something you don't know in some cases whether it's going to even work. You can pretty much tell that the audience that I'm going to speak to on my channel is pretty much going to be, to a degree, engaged, because you kind of go like, that's why I bought the program, or that's why I commissioned the program. When you're outside of that, you're not really 100% sure. And in some cases, you're getting engagement and affinity, but you're not getting viewership. Especially if you're on a pay TV situation, because obviously someone's got to subscribe to it. Different with Channel 4.
Because that matters less, because obviously the two models, if you're
That's
Sky, Netflix don't release how many people watch, because it doesn't really matter how many people watch the show as long as they keep paying their subscription.
We still like people to watch, don't get me wrong. But the reality is, brand value is not just defined by viewership.
No.
And that's an important part, and that's why we keep talking about that. And our big change from that perspective, especially when you've got genre brands, so crime, sci-fi, e-entertainment, the ones that you can kind of go, they're pretty niched out there. They're no longer addressing just the content we have. They're addressing a genre, an audience that's interested in like things. I mean, we launched Hey You, which is our first B2B reality on demand piece. And really the tone of that was not just an SVOD, here's a load of content, go and find it. There was editorial behind it, a tone of voice. It was actually by fans, for fans, and passion brands become very important. Emotional connections become important. That stuff that creative has been doing for a long time. Yeah. If you think about it, the marketing creative has always been about generating an emotional response, whether it's humans, whether it's Top Gear, whether it's whatever. You want to feel something. You want to feel that the people promoting to you love the stuff.
I mean, to me, that's a really good point around. Obviously, you want it to drive viewing or consumption, but depending on what your brand, our brand values come from our sort of remit, which is set in law, which is that Channel 4 was set up to offer alternative perspectives, to take risks, to do innovative things. So we will obviously invest in marketing and get behind shows that aren't necessarily going to deliver huge numbers, because we think that they're doing something more important than just simply entertaining people.
But they reflect on the brand.
Yeah, and the BBC would be similar in that.
Same thing.
Very much.
They have huge, not necessarily viewership, but the fact that you're doing it has real value to that.
So innovation is clearly a key here. Talk about doing things differently. Tell me, Mark, a little bit about some of the, you've done some pretty innovative things with live commercials and that sort of thing. Tell me a little bit about your thought process towards innovating new ways of taking production and content and distributing it and marketing it. And tell me a little bit about your relationship with the marketing department when you go into those kinds of projects.
The big shift we're seeing with the agencies, the creative agencies, the advertisers, is it's running parallel with the shift in audiences, that they no longer is it acceptable just to give them a marketing message. There has to be much more engagement with the product. And our business is increasingly seeing marketeers and advertisers come to it saying, we want to have a always-on, real-time, two-way conversation that is less about people. Ultimately, the end game is we want people to buy stuff, but we don't want to look like we're asking people to buy stuff. So we want to say to people, engage with our brand, engage with our narrative, and you'll buy stuff. But that's not the point of this conversation, consumer. The point is to have a good conversation. And things like live TV ads that we make for ITV and for others is all about entertaining people with a marketing message, but entertaining people first, rather than marketing to them. Same with, we do a thing with Club 1830 TV, which instead of buying a holiday for Club 1830, it's about immersing yourself in the brand experience, living with people that you've either been on holiday with, about to go on holiday with, can't remember whether they went on holiday with, engaging with them permanently in an always-on environment. And you know what? People buy more stuff at the end of the day. That's a big shift from just, here's a holiday you could go on.
So social media clearly is a big part of what you guys now use to help market and distribute message.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what you're doing with social media. And the interesting thing to me about social media, and I'll just throw this out there, is I don't think it works unless you have that two-way conversation. It doesn't work unless somebody just puts up something. If you don't reply to it or respond to it, does it work?
No. And I think also the important thing is really understanding your audiences, because we've seen some spectacular ways in which brands have completely backfired. And I used the example of the Aldi campaign where they went out, and I think it was, I fell in love with Aldi when I tasted, and that was just begging to be ripped by consumers. Waitrose has fallen into the same, under the same trap. I think the fantastic thing about our social and digital teams is the insight they give us into our audiences. And particularly when we look at, we have some big brands that have got very, very active fan communities. You look at Top Gear, Sherlock, Doctor Who, really engaged. But what do you do with those people when you're in the process of making a show and you go dark for a year and they're desperate for content? That for us is where the big opportunity is. So we have a fantastic digital team that is serving up content with fan shows and always serving
So it's all new original stuff?
It's all new original stuff that our digital studios team do. With respect to how we work with our social teams, more and more as we work on these big integrated briefs for our big brands that we know we have really active communities on. I use the case of Sherlock. For us, the beginning of the brief, it actually really defines a creative strategy, because what we do is spend time talking about, so what's the pulse? What is the mood out there? What are people obsessing about? What is it from the previous series that has sort of had people talking about key points? And we use that in a way to sometimes misdirect our audiences, to really play with them, to serve up in our promo campaigns things that we know is going to get the level of chatter up. And I think that's the power of social media. It's not just about, we made a promo, we're going to just
repurpose,
put it out there and repurpose it. It's about how do we play with our audiences in that space in a way that really serves what we want them to do, which is to be talking about us.
I think that's interesting because sort of in the old days, it was you'd play against assumption. So what does the audience assume? Play to that assumption and then put on the brakes and make a hard left. So it really creates a situation where you can be more inspirational and innovative with what it is that you're trying to do.
I think it was talked on, you still want to entertain. You want people to basically, whatever social strategy you're adopting for that show or for that brand or whatever it is, you're still basically looking for eyeballs, entertain them, make them ultimately feel something or feel good or certainly engage in some way, shape or form. what it also does from a creative perspective, it gives you permission to play. Because ultimately, the amount of times I've gone in and kind of going, we're doing this, but it's for social, and they're going, oh, okay then. It gives you a much broader way of communicating with a much broader audience, potentially. What is fascinating from us is, you can create a strategy for it. You certainly can absolutely, go into that and say, right, that's how I want to talk. But the amount of times that we put stuff out there and still cannot predict is really exciting. I mean, clearly for me.
Exciting
for other
until
people,
it just dies.
But, well, actually, the issue is if it dies and creates a problem with the viewership.
You've learned something.
You learn something in the process. I think, the amount of, we were talking about it earlier, the amount of times we're still getting requests like, can you give me a viral campaign? It's like, no, maybe, we'll see. But
really, people still think
that, right? And then we were talking about fun keywords that you use in social. It's got to be disruptive. I love the brief that says, please make it stand out. Okay.
No, we won't make it stand out. We don't want to make it stand out. No,
and then my next favorite is, and it's got to be authentic.
Yeah.
So,
and organic. It's got to be organic.
It's got to be authentic and real.
Yeah.
But I said, next thing you're going to add is cool to this, and then we're really fucked.
But I think that's a really funny thing about it, because this is called the view from the top, and actually the view from the top is no clearer. Nobody knows where any of this is going.
Shh, you're not supposed to say
Nobody knows.
You have every answer.
To me, that's what's exciting about it.
Yeah, that's what's great about it.
You've done some, as we said a couple minutes ago, you've done some really cool stuff. But here's a question that came up. Use of social media to create a data pool to help you determine what it is you're going to do next. Is that something that you think of?
We try. The issue for, let me give you the illustration. 3 weeks ago, we did a live ad in X Factor for ITV from 8 different countries in the world, simultaneously, all live, people scuba diving, people going Arctic climbing, people in the Caribbean, people doing all sorts of stuff. And the frustrating thing was no insight, nothing, no intel as to the value of that, other than great press, great PR, great marketing. Wow, amazing, cool. It was all done, it was cool.
See, it's cool. Was it authentic as well?
Yeah. and nobody had to ask you.
Give us the data, give us the insight back. And this is the relationship between consumer in the sense of a broadcaster and producer. But where's the wonderful thing about the digital element is you should be able to have an interaction. You should be able to have instant data coming back that says, hey, now do an ad an hour later that does something else because of what you've learned. That's the next phase of innovation for me, rather than, wasn't it clever? Sure, it's clever. It's clever for one day.
The one thing I would say that is everyone in this room is fortunate to work in an industry where your product is inherently interesting.
Mostly.
And most of the time,
but mostly.
The whole social media
Never worked in news, did you?
Content marketing.
I'd say sport for me, but yeah.
The world that's grown up has been about, can we make quite a dull product interesting? So, there'll be agencies being asked to sort of do a content marketing strategy for toilet paper or something and create loads of video content.
Foreplay.
Exactly. And not the challenge to that is sort of, does it actually lead to sort of sales? Well, I think we've got slightly the problem the other way around is sometimes in social you don't have to overthink what you need to put out there. Sometimes just a really funny, memorable clip from one of your best shows that connects to some discussion that's going on out there in the world. We've mined shows like Peep Show, Fresh Meat, and there's a bit in that show that will connect to something that Donald Trump's just said, and you just put it out on social, and that will fly, rather than we need a really high conceptual, expensive idea. It can be very low cost. I mean, the challenge with social is obviously resource intensive. It needs people, it needs to do the stuff. But the way the industry used to be obsessed by Twitter, because that's what senior stakeholders were on, and people would place far too much attention on a specific tweet. And Facebook is clearly the dominant platform. Facebook video has transformed what you can do with it, and it's all about reach. Ultimately, it's not about how many people have liked your page, because people probably won't necessarily like the page. News organisations, yes, it's about getting that post out to as wide as possible audiences. And if you can drop onto a cultural thing that's going on, it's going to get shared really widely.
Yeah, I
You
think-
better,
Just put an ad, you
use
can't-
Twitter right now, by the
Yeah,
way,
it's
because it's
gonna
going to
go.
be out of business,
think?
really. Yeah, I think.
I mean, look, I think one of the things that social does allow us to do as well is maintain conversations outside and continue conversations at relatively low cost. So fundamentally, you are able to put your brand, whether it's a program, whether it is your channel, out there if you have the resource.
Yeah.
Almost on an always-on level, but you need to have things to talk about. I
Has
mean,
to be
that's the
always on.
biggest issue. So you're kind of running out of show conversations, and you're having to kind of start thinking about what else am I going to talk to these people about. And there's only so many cat gags you're going to use, and there's only so many loo roll things you're going to use. I mean, the thing that we're finding is you need to feed the beast huge amounts, and you can't just throw any old crap up there.
No, you've
Although
got to beat, you're
can
trying
be
to
a
beat
little
the
bit.
algorithm, and you're trying to
But-
balance organic reach versus the money that Facebook wants you to put into it.
And to Mark's point, I can get a huge amount of interaction, doesn't mean they're actually going to go and watch the show or go to the brand.
Yeah.
However, not doing it is not an option.
But you could say
Yeah.
that for, I mean,
That's the other thing to look at. You don't have an option not to be out there, and you don't have an option.
you could say the
not
whole
to-
kind of does it lead to viewing. I mean, you know, since the dawn of marketing, it's like, does that poster mean that somebody's going to go and watch your show? It's quite hard to say. TV is the one media where you
Well-
can actually track it.
Look, I mean, traditionally though, you said it at the beginning, TV's not dead. Most of the value I'm still getting is from putting it up on the screens. And we're having the same thing. If I'm going to sell like the Fallon show, I know that of course we've done the whole end-to-end strategy on this.
Yeah.
However, there's still print, there's a huge amount of on air, and there's a lot of the rest as well. You are essentially going a much broader brush to ensure you're mopping up as much as possible.
mean,
and you have to do that.
Just mention the humans example. Obviously, we created effectively a piece of content marketing, but it was so part of the show. It wasn't like a layer on top of it. But that kind of launched with a spot, a sort of a fake ad for Persona Synthetics in Gogglebox. So, you get it out there by millions of people see it. And obviously the Regent Street store and those other aspects were amplified it through social media. But the big driver was an on-air promotional spot. That's still the thing that's really going to push.
But I think the case study from last week was Fox Sport. If anyone saw, I've seen this. I never watched Fox Sport, but I've seen it socially. They took the break, they binned the break, and they put up T-Mobile. They changed the set all through HD, through VR rather. So as the commercial break should have played, no commercial break happens. T-Mobile take over the studio set. Presenter does a live read about T-Mobile, but suddenly the consumer's taken from thinking they're about to go and put the kettle on because there's a TV commercial break coming to a conversation they're still interested in with the brand is actually still on the screen. Socially is where I found it. And you go on and see what's happened in the Fox Sports T-Mobile campaign since that one takeover of a break happened last week. I've never watched Fox Sport in my life. Suddenly I know about Fox Sport. So your illustration is humans, but you come from the point of view of an advertiser. I think that's a really smart, using a TV show to suddenly take consumers from there right the way over here and have a conversation.
But will you watch Fox Sport now?
Well, it's on my radar now. I need to find out what sport they got on.
So, look, we're just about out of time. I told you this thing would be over before it even began. But there's a lot left to talk about, and these conversations will be taking place throughout the course of the day. But one thing I want to ask you, because you guys come from companies that have lots of other distribution points. So there's many BBCs, there's many NBCUniversals, there's a lot of channels, there's all these other places. You have the same sort of situation, maybe not quite as large as BBC or NBCUniversal in terms of scope. But you can interact your programs in your other programs through some sort of force of a larger marketing council that says you're going to now take advantage of the other programs and organically, in a cool way, market your stuff in other television programs that more people will see. Another way to market. Is that a yes or a no?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because the classic way of doing that is if you've got kind of live magazine type format shows, whether it's Graham Norton, and you can get somebody from the new drama, the actor on it, and
It also makes the assumption that they're the same audiences, and they're
Yes.
not,
yeah,
not
but
always.
and you've got BBC.
Or you're trying to gain a different audience. Always hard to do that anyway.
BBC
Yeah.
Sports
I mean,
format,
you
its
look for
footprint through
exposure.
radio.
Yeah.
I mean, and how you do that varies. And to your point, yes, where you can. Yes, where it's appropriate. Yes, because it makes sense, but it's not a slam dunk as
think I'm-
always. It's not that case.
But the key is still, and always will be, yes or no, it's reach and frequency of that message.
I mean, it just personally, I think that's still a kind of old model that you sort of go through one show to talk about another show. I think where we're particularly seeing it is in terms of the sorts of partnerships we do. So if we want to build some of our global brands, channel brands like BBC Earth, we'll be looking much more at actually how we monetize that brand and look at, for example, we have some of the best natural history content in the world. So do we look at VR experiences that live out in the real world, that the experience itself is what builds the brand and promotes the content rather than, again, looking at linear television to solve those problems. So I think how we answer those questions have become so much more about, because I think with all of these new technologies or new platforms, a lot of it is a leap of faith. Nobody knows.
And there is no
keep
reach.
your hand in it.
Let's not kid ourselves. There's not great reach yet with VR until Disney decides to make the next Star Wars movie in VR.
But everybody want to keep their hand in it just in case.
But we launched a hybrid VR show, which was meant to be just, short form, almost like when it was first conceived, was very, very niche. And we just took that as an opportunity to really blow it out in terms of sci-fi branding. It's a brand opportunity. Everyone's launching a new headset every month, and we used that. And it became, and actually we got really good viewership, which we weren't unexpected. We didn't go for that. But it was talking to a very niche audience and a lot of interested parties. Is that good for a brand like Sci-Fi? Damn right, yes it is. But for another brand, not really, because it was too niche.
Probably perfect for Sci-Fi.
It was, actually.
Yeah.
I think reach and frequency is still very important,
it's still
because
important.
there's always potential for new viewers, and I think it really
It's
slightly
right, it's
depends
true.
on your model. You need to still bring new people in, and a huge investment in preaching to the converted can be a tricky one. I mean, obviously, if it's a long-running franchise or whatever, and you want to just make sure you keep them sticking, but you can always potentially bring in new viewers if you're losing old viewers. So reach and frequency is still very important, I believe.
So that's all the time we have. If you have any questions for James, Raf, Marco, or Mark in the chat room out there, please stick around, because the next thing that's coming up is a demonstration of Tilt Brush by Google, which is, unless you've seen it, it will blow you away, I promise. Thank you all very much. Thank you, guys.